All right, good evening, everybody. Can everyone hear me? Welcome to the Community Preservation Committee's informational meeting. My name is Ryan Tressel, I'm the chair, so I need to call the meeting to order. Do I have to vote on that? I always forget. I'm just calling it to order. I'm taking charge. So the Community Preservation Act was passed in the year 2000, and one of the subsections of it, which is actually 5B1, says that we have to have a public informational meeting, which is what we're having here tonight. Also, as part of the law, is 5A is the way that the board is constituted, and it's spelled out very clearly in the law how the board is constituted. So I thought I would explain that. It would also give me an opportunity to introduce the board members as well. So there has to be at least 5 and no more than 9 members on the Community Preservation Committee. 5 of those have to be made up of representatives from 5 different town committees. So one is the Conservation Commission, which is represented tonight by Jake Dodge, who's on the committee. One from the Historic Commission, Elaine Bergeron, represents the Historic Commission. One is the Planning Board, which is Brandon Griffin. One is the Recreation Commission, which is represented by Michelle LaMattina. One is the Housing Authority, which is represented by Patty McKay. And then there are 4 at-large members, including myself, John Goldrosen, who is our vice chair, Rich Rosen, and Melissa Lothrop, who are here so that constitutes our board. Also on the dais, as they will, is our recording secretary, Michelle Rugger. So part of the purpose of this meeting here tonight is to inform the people of Whitman about the CPA, the Community Preservation Act, especially because our application for CPA projects has been released. It is on the town website. So we'll talk a little bit about the Act, a little bit about the community preservation projects, what is allowed, what is not allowed, and then the process for applying for these projects. As I mentioned, the CPA was passed in the year 2000. It was inspired by an organization in Nantucket, which went around. They created a system for buying up open space land to preserve it, and lots of communities wanted to do the same thing. And eventually, that kind of morphed into the Community Preservation Act, which combines, as you can see here on my. Well, you can't actually see; it's my body is blocking it. So I'll just move this slightly. Open space, historic preservation, recreation, and affordable housing. And those are the 4 categories of projects that fall under the Community Preservation Act. Henceforth, why we have the various representatives from the various boards here to represent those interests. So the way that the Community Preservation Act is funded here in Whitman is that there is a surcharge, which as Whitmanites you have been paying and you know about, represents 1% of real estate property taxes for both residential and business. And so that money gets put into a special fund here for the Community Preservation Act. And of that, 10% it has to be put in to the 3 buckets, as they call it. And I know we've talked a little bit at our meetings about the anachronistic phrase buckets, but that's actually what they refer to them. So 10% has to go into open space, 10% has to go into community housing, and 10% has to go into historic preservation. And every year, 10% of the monies that are brought in through that surcharge are put into those buckets. We as a committee can decide to put in, well, what we do is we would put it to the town meeting to put in more than 10%, but we have to put in at least 10% every year of those funds. Those funds are also matched by the state, and that's one of the benefits of becoming a community preservation community, is that we now have access to state monies that up until this year we did not have access to. This year the match was 35%. It varies every year, and we usually find out, like, as I think Selectman Evans can attest, like right at the absolute last second before we need to close the warrant. This year it was 35%. A lot of it is based on, how obviously the state is doing very well in terms of their tax collection the last year or so, the amount was a little bit larger this year. So we have the money that we bring in as Whitmanites, and then the money that the state brings us as well to fund these different projects. So as you can see here, I made this. This is actually ripped off from the actual. There's a great website. We had a gentleman from the Community Preservation Coalition come and speak to us at the beginning of our endeavor. We started as a board back in, I think our first meeting was in December. He came and spoke to us and kind of gave us a lot of resources, but one was this this chart which shows the various categories of CPA projects, and then what is allowed within those various categories. The law is very complex, and there is no governing body on the law in the state. It's not run by, or overseen by anything. So a lot of the restrictions that are put on community preservation projects have come from courts, as citizens in various towns have raised lawsuits against certain community preservation projects, so it is a little tricky to get through them. So, as we see, we have open space. So open space, as a community preservation committee, we can, again, we make recommendations to town meeting, but town meeting can approve money to acquire open space, create open space, or preserve open space, but we cannot use that money to support or rehabilitate or restore open space. So that's something that's important as we go through these projects, and as we look at these projects as they're submitted to us, which is that, for example, someone could come in with a proposal to acquire open space in the town of Whitman, but then the question will become, well, how is that open space going to be maintained and supported? Because under state law, community preservation money cannot be used to support or restore that land. So one of the things that you will see as you go through the application are questions about, do you have additional sources of funding for these projects? And that's one of the things that we would be looking at as we go through that process, to make sure that if we don't want to certainly buy a piece of open space and then have no way, or there's no mechanism to maintain it or rehabilitate it. So those are questions that are going to be asked when we go through those processes for example, open space. Historic restoration, we can acquire historic buildings, we can preserve them. We can't create them, which obviously makes a little bit of sense. Obviously we can't make a historic building or a historic landmark, so therefore we can't create it, and we can't support it. So we can give we can give money to rehabilitate, restore historic spaces in town, but then we are not able to give money or recommend, the money, community preservation money. I keep saying we're going to give the money like I've got a big checkbook, like Daddy Warbucks. I'm not. We'll obviously, as we said, we will be giving recommendations to town meeting, and town meeting will appropriate the money. But community preservation money cannot be spent to support, a historic project. Recreation, we can acquire, we can create, we can preserve, and we can rehabilitate recreational spaces, but we can't support it. So again, we can't maintain, so if someone, for example, had a great idea for a new soccer field in town, we could certainly give them money if they wanted to acquire it, create it, preserve it, but we can't, in order to support it, we can't maintain the fields using community preservation money. Housing, which is, I think, and you can imagine one of the more trickier kind of projects, has kind of the least amount of restrictions on it. So we can support affordable housing with Community Preservation Act dollars, but we cannot rehabilitate or restore. The only caveats to that is we can rehabilitate or restore these open space or housing if we created or acquired it. So those are the kind of limitations that are put on these different projects. The other thing is that, like I said, we are not a body that will oversee these projects. These projects will be overseen by the applicants as well as the relevant town agencies or the town committees that oversee those areas. So, I think some people might have this idea that, they're going to come in, with it, like, a soccer field would be great here, and then I'm going to go out with a shovel and start working on it. That's not the role of the Community Preservation Committee. Ours is to vet the applications for these projects to make sure that first, that they are allowable under the law, and then to make recommendations to town meeting about, bringing those projects to town meeting for a vote. So to that end, the process that we developed over the course of the summer for our applications, and we stole a lot of stuff, or we looked at other towns' applications, and one of the things that I think we all agreed on was a very kind of sound way to go about it is having a two-step application process. So the first step is a pre-application, and this is a shorter application that basically outlines the basics of the projects, kind of an overview, a timeline, but also it's to make sure that before you start going, if you were interested in going into one of these projects, before you start doing a tremendous amount of work and doing a lot of upkeep, it would be a lot harder. For example, if you spent weeks and weeks putting together this application and bringing it to us and being like, oh, by the way, that's not allowable under the law. So the pre-application process is such that we can look at an application, and at that point, the pre-application process will us as a committee, and hope, maybe we'll be involving town council if necessary, making sure that the projects are allowable under the state law. And then if they are, then you can move forward with the application process to make sure that we're not wasting anybody's time. Like I said, the amount of work that will go in to these applications is pretty great. There's a lot of stuff that we're going to be looking for as a committee to make sure that before we recommend to town meeting that we give you, or give a project a substantial amount of Whitmanites' money, town money, that we have a good sense that the project will be done in a correct way and done to completion. And so there's a lot of ask on the application. So the pre-application, which is do first, is just to assess viability under the law. The second step after that, and so we would, once those pre-applications are in, we as a board will kind of go through those, and then we will notify applicants that their project is allowable under the law, so then they can move forward with the application process. And then once the applications come in, then we as a committee will work, as a committee with relevant town committees, and for example, with town council, I'm sure with the selectmen and with the town administrator, to then kind of come together with projects that we think should be brought forward to town meeting in the spring for vote at the town meeting floor for community preservation dollars. So that is generally the process that we'll be using. It's one that is used by a lot of communities throughout Massachusetts, and when we looked at a lot of different applications, that was some didn't do that, some just had one big crazy long application. We felt the two-step one made the most sense from our end, and I think, I always try to be very empathetic and think about how would I feel if I spent weeks and weeks getting together all of this documentation and, talking to relevant parties, and then to go in there and just have it be an automatic no because it did not qualify under the state law. So the pre-application process we thought was very sound for that reason. So some of the questions I anticipate people might have is how much money do we have, and that's a question I don't have a solid answer to. I know how much money we collected last year. I know how much the state match will be, and I don't know exactly. I know that by November 15th, the state is supposed to be giving us their 35% of that money. So the figure that we had for, and Selectman Evans might know more, it was around $200,000 for last year. So that would be $70,000 that the state will then kick in as well. We will also, by the time we get to town meeting in May, I believe that the state gave out the match amount, the match percentage, like I think it was the last week in April. So it was very tight. It was mid-April maybe, I think. But so when we come to town meeting, when we are deliberating about the various projects we'll be moving forward to town meeting, we should have a sense of what we have from last year and what we project we'll have this year, plus the state match, so that we'll have a better sense of how much money we'll have to fund these projects. But I don't have that exact figure now because there are estimates and different things about how much money we will be collecting over the course of FY23. So I think I just gave a lot of information. I don't know if any of it really made a whole lot of sense, but I think I covered all the things I wanted to cover. So I wanted to kind of give an opportunity, first of all, if anyone on the committee feels like I left anything out that they want me to address, and then I can maybe open it up to any questions from our visitors here. First of all, anybody on the committee? Okay, you guys are cool? Okay. Oh, Brandon's good for now, so we'll see what that means for me later. But we have a question, yeah. So if you wouldn't mind, I think because this is being broadcast on WHCA, which I should have mentioned earlier, if you wouldn't mind just stepping up to the microphone so they can hear you on back home.
My question is, if you don't use the monies, do you lose it?
No. So that's a really great thing about we bank that money. So for example, we are looking at, this is a very obviously tighter window because, I've mentioned this, but you'll see on the website the pre-application is due on the 15th of October, which is only about 3 weeks away, and the full application is due, I think it's January 15th. So it's not a lot of time for especially big projects, but the nice thing is that the money that we collect will just, as long as we put that 10% in those buckets and then the other portion of it, we're allowed to take 5% for administrative expenses, but the rest of it is, we get to keep it and we just bank it. So for example, there are some towns that, we looked at that did not fund any major CPA projects for several years because they wanted to build, there was a big project they had in mind that they wanted to build up their war chest for. So this money that we collect, as long as we put it in those categories, we can bank it and keep it, and so if we don't have enough projects, for example, this first year, it's not like that money goes away. We can just use that the following year, or any subsequent years. Yes, great question. Any other questions? Yes.
Just that before something that I kind of wondered, I don't think other towns have run into this. Can we use some of the administrative expenses on things beyond this committee? So like if we need to seek opinion from town council, could we apply those administrative expenses to legal fees?
I believe so, yes. Because I know that was one of the things that when we talked to Stuart from the Community Preservation Council, like things like doing research on deeds, for example, was something that would, so it's not just for recording secretaries or any administrative expenses, photocopying, talking to the lawyers, things like that would all be covered under those administrative expenses, as far as I understand.
What was the last part? You said legal counsel?
If you guys need to seek opinion from town council on what may or may not be allowed the project, could we seek, I guess, payment out of the administrative fund of this committee?
Yes.
We'll get you a solid yes on that.
Yeah. I believe that's correct, but I'll talk to Stu. Stu loves when I email him. So, hello.
Which website do you want?
So if you go to the town website,
yes.
There is under boards there is a page for the community preservation committee, and on the side tab of that there are links to the pre-application and the application. I tested them both today. They're fillable PDFs, so you can just type in right there, and then what we would ask is that you submit them to us by email. Our email is cpc@whitman-mad.gov. And then they'll ask you to provide paper copies at the town clerk's office for us as well.
Okay, I'll do that. Thank you.
Yeah, welcome.
Hi.
Hello.
My name is Eileen Gibson. I'm the director of the Whitman Housing Authority.
Okay.
And I was wondering, do you know percentage-wise what public housing will get?
So the way it works is that we have 10% that we have to put into that fund. And then the rest is not it can be used in any of the other categories. So it depends. We are not necessarily allocated. So for example, if we got a great housing authority project, we can spend all of the money less the other 10% for those buckets on that. So the money that so it depends on what projects are brought forward to us as a committee, rather than we have to, so for example, we could just keep banking 10% in, for example, open space every year and not do any open space projects. As long as we were putting 10% in that account, we can spend, we can use the rest of the money, we put 10 in the three categories, and then that other, I guess it would be 65% less the administrative costs, we can use for any number of combinations of projects. So it really depends on what projects are presented to us, or what projects come before the board is what we'll spend.
Okay, so currently at our two elderly state elderly projects, we have 4 quotes that we need to preserve public housing at our Pine Circle, Stetson Terrace projects. So our harbor port was funded, was subsidized by the federal government, which is great. We have enough money, and we just did a $1.2 million project there for windows and siding. But our state elderly is suffering because our budget, our average rent for elderly, which includes heat, hot water, and electricity, is $399 a month, and you're not going to find that anywhere.
Right.
It's safe and it's clean and it's affordable, but we need to preserve that. And so, like I said, we have $4.7 million of projects that are just sitting there waiting to be done. So I was just wondering, when you said it was a 10% put away, should I try to apply for as much as I can, of the health, especially the health and safety needs?
I mean, I think that's, yeah, I would apply for what you need, or what you think, what projects you think you want to go forward with. But like I said, that there's under the law, we have to put aside that 10% of every year. 10% has to go into those categories, into those accounts. But there's no statutory need to spend that money each year. So it would, like I said, we can spend the other 65, or we can, again, I keep saying we can spend, like I've got the checkbook, but we can recommend projects for that 65%, for example. We could make a recommendation that other 65% go to any one of the categories. So it would depend on what projects were brought before us, like what we think about the viability of those projects, but there's no guarantee that, like for example, we have to spend a certain amount on housing every year, or so many projects, open space projects, so many recreation projects. It's really, the law only requires that we set aside that money every year. And then, like I said, then it would be our discretion as a committee for what projects we recommend to town meeting for that community preservation money to be spent on. So my recommendation would be, if there are projects that you really believe that community preservation money would be a big help in, I would apply for those projects.
Okay, great. Thank you so
You're
much.
welcome. Thank you. Brandon, do you have something you want to say?
Yeah. That's okay.
Okay.
So on the pre-application, you have to have an estimated cost already to go?
Yes. So we're looking for that, for like an estimated cost. So I'll kind of go through just like what we ask on the pre-application, so that to help you guys out. So just basically, like, we ask, what is the project? Who is the sponsor of the project? So for example, if it's an individual, if it's an organization, right? If it's a group, and whether it's a town committee. So for example, some of the town committees very well might want to themselves apply for community preservation money for projects within that their own committees or their own boards are working on, whether it's a public charity or nonprofit, or whether it's a private group or an individual. So we'll ask that question. Just obviously contact information, an estimate of what the project would cost, and then how much money that you would be looking for from the community preservation funding for that. So that, and then if there are other sources of funding that you're anticipating. So some projects might be rather large and more than the community preservation committee has to recommend in terms of what our coffers are. But you might be like, well, we have a source of funding from this organization that's going to be kicking in, 60% of the cost. We're looking to get the other 40%. Can we apply for that? So knowing what an estimate of what the total cost would be and what you're looking for from community preservation funds is something that we look for on the pre-application. And then there's just this chart that I made with my own two hands there's a nice printed copy here that you can look to kind of check on that. But so you might be able to kind of get a sense of yourself. But again, like a lot of this stuff is like I imagine we will be looking out for help from the Community Preservation Coalition, who really is this nonprofit group that really supports this Community Preservation Act communities. We'll be looking for their guidance on some of these things as well, and like I said, maybe even possibly town council on certain things. But I think if you might be able to look at this and be like, oh, actually, you know what, this is this doesn't qualify. Then just a brief description of the project, and then a question if you've already talked to relevant town committees and/or departments about, because one thing we want to know is if, if you are looking to, I'm going to make up something ridiculous, put in an ice rink at the town park, that sounds great, but if the DPW doesn't really want, because you're going to need buy-in from the relevant departments in town. So have you talked to them? Have you, on the application process, there is a part where we are looking for, that you've actually talked to them and they have agreed to it, and they have, with their contact information as well, so we know that the relevant town committees that oversee that area, if that's the case, are on board with working on the project. So the pre-application is basically, have you looked into how much it's going to cost? Do you have other sources of funding if you need them? What is the project like? What is the brief description of it? And then have you made overtures to the relevant town department to see if that's something that they would support the project going forward? Did that answer your question?
Yes, so I'm gonna fill out the application, but I think my estimated cost is gonna be TBD.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah. I think TBD, I think,
just until, so the final application is January.
January, right, yes.
All right, so between October and January, then.
Right.
Give a time frame to come up with.
Right.
Right, okay.
We kind of went for a balance of due diligence and viability. So if you're TBD or you're $80,000, we're not locking you in here and
Right.
snapping into that figure.
Right.
It's just a preemptive request. Is it legal? Is it
Right.
acceptable?
Right.
When we review it, will we make a motion to recommend,
Okay,
or we can send it back and discuss?
all right,
So,
great.
yeah, the estimate is exactly.
Right, it's exactly an estimate of what you think it will cost, or, but if you say TBD and you're like, and then,
Well, I could say like, under 10,000 or something like.
right, I think even if you put a range, for example, of what you think the project, it doesn't have to be an exact, but an estimate, range, so that we have a general sense too of, if it ends up being, if you're like, we're looking for $1.8 million, it might be like, maybe come back in a couple of years.
Yeah,
Or downscale, yeah, thank you very, yep, thank you. Okay. Yep.
Hi, Maria Taylor from the Historical Commission. Is there any limit on how many applications a group can apply for?
Oh, no, I can't imagine there would be. There's nothing that I've read that says that, so I think that if the Historical Commission, for example, has, multiple projects that they're interested in, then they can submit as many applications as they would like, and I think that then,
We're not going to kill you.
well, I know, but yeah, I appreciate that. But I think that the idea, and I also think that one of the things that I look at this too is on the one hand, our job is, and this is our stated job, is to obviously look through these applications and make recommendations to town meeting about the use of community preservation funds. But I also think this is a good opportunity to find out what the community needs are as well. Even if we are not able, as a community preservation committee, able to fund all of these projects, it's good, I think, to get a sense too of what the community is. I think the name of community preservation, I think it implies the idea that this was set up, and again, I said this was started in Nantucket, the idea of keeping the community that we know and we love and trying to preserve it. And so I think the idea of the more that we can get that information about what people and different committees in the town feel the needs are, I think that that's a net good, even if we're not able to fund all of them, because then we can, we get that stuff out into the open. So I think, so as many applications as you'd like. Do we have any other questions? Oh, John, you want to come up and?
Just in case you have more questions.
Okay.
Ryan, you mentioned our page on the town website. Do we have a link to the Community Preservation Coalition website from our
Yes.
page? Okay.
Yeah.
So that a lot of, all these terms.
It's also on the pre-application as well.
Okay, but, so all these terms that Ryan went through, each of them has a definition. That helps to decide what's eligible and what's not. And, we're all in the position of kind of learning ourselves this, and we'll talk to town council as necessary, but we're sort of educating ourselves. But even as you look at your projects, you can also just link to the Community Preservation Coalition website from our town page, and there's all kinds of documents on that, FAQs and lists of examples of projects that are eligible and are not eligible. So there's a lot of information that you can get to that'll help you even as you're planning or have questions in your mind about these things.
John. All right. Do we have any other questions or does anybody have anything else that they'd like to discuss before? I think I put on here that we have to approve our minutes. I think we can do that after everybody, all the normies have left. If there's no other questions, I just want to thank everyone for coming. Like I said, this is our first year as a committee, as the first year of being a CPA community. I'm very excited about the possibilities that this act and this law brings to Whitman, and the ability that we'll be able to have to hopefully fund some really terrific projects to really help, again, in the name, preserve our community, because I think that that's really the intent of the law, and I think that it's something that is a worthwhile endeavor for a town to embark upon. So I want to thank you guys for coming out, and I hope that if you have any other questions that you think about after you leave, as we always do, right? We walk out and we think of something we should have asked. There is an email on the town page for us. You can email us, and we will get an answer back to you forthwith. So with that having been said, if there's nothing else, I want to thank everyone for coming out, and thank you for your interest in the Community Preservation Committee. Thank you very much. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
All right. Before we adjourn, we have meeting minutes for August 2nd and August 23rd. So can I have a motion to approve the minutes of August 2nd? Okay, any discussion? Okay. All right, seeing none, can I have a vote to approve the meeting minutes of August 2nd?
Yes.
All right. Very good. All right, and then can I have a motion to approve the meeting minutes of August 23rd?
So moved.
Second.
All right, any discussion?
No.
All right, seeing none. All in favor, all approved? All right. So with that, should we set the meeting agenda for the meeting time for next month? We want to do.
We should.
Should we do? I know we usually do the first.
I have a question.
Yep.
On the time, because I wanted to extend courtesy to people that might have kids in school, and now if September comes around, maybe it might affect the schedule.
Okay. So yeah, so the question is, we're going to set the time for our October meeting, and so the thing that what Brandon just brought up was we've been doing 5:30, and his and I don't know if I know Melissa and I are both and Michelle are parents. If 5:30 is a good time for parents, or is later better? I think so. I think 5:30 works. I think because then I think a lot of times if there are other meetings after that people are on, that usually doesn't bump into that. So we'll keep it at 5:30. And then if the applications are due October 15th, should we have the October meeting after that, or do we want to have one?
Why wouldn't you just wait until right after the application deadline?
Okay.
It should be October 17th.
What?
October 17th.
October 17th then, Monday?
So that Tuesday. So is it Tuesday the 17th?
Tuesday's the 18th.
Tuesday the 18th. Yeah. Is anyone? John.
I
Okay. All right.
It's fine.
Is that, anyone have any problem with, other than John, with the 18th at 5:30? So what we'll do is all the applications will come in, we'll get them, and we'll be able to discuss them on, because all the applications will be in paper copies too, so we'll have paper copies for the meeting as well. I'll make sure that they get emailed to everybody as well from the CPC email address, so we'll all have them in advance of the meeting, but we'll do, so can I have a motion to set the next meeting date at October 18th at 5:30?
I'll make a motion.
Okay. All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay. All right, and the last bit of meeting is to adjourn. Can I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
Second?
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
All right, thank you guys very much
Thank you, Ray.
for coming in. I appreciate it. I don't know if you...
Good night, fellas.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
You should.